The Onion, a satirical newspaper from the United States, recently published an article claiming that Kim Jong-un is the sexiest man alive. Now, the China Daily, one of China's head newspapers, didn't understand the article to be satire, and then published a 55-page photo spread on their website detailing the effects of his sexual nature, including his sexy chubby cheeks and his power over the North Korean people. Now, this mistake, as hilarious as it may be, actually represents a larger trend we see emerging between the United States and China. China, being the biggest shared ally of North Korea, has much diplomatic pressure over their nuclear policies. Now, an article by The Economist entitled "A Change in North Korea" from last week tells us that Kim Jong-un had a very large pair of women's sunglasses to fill, and he's done it quite effectively in that he's consolidated his power over the North Korean people. And with Wednesday's last nuclear test, only the third in the past since 2006, including one that occurred in 2009, it's important to note how these events will ultimately affect the United States. So considering the UN News Center reported this very morning that the European countries agreed to tighten sanctions on North Korea, it is vital that we ask today's question. How long until North Korea is able to hit the United States with its nuclear weapons? My answer is mid-2014 at the soonest, because their capabilities are exaggerated for three reasons. First, the economic sanctions will work in the long term. Second, China will apply diplomatic pressure. And lastly, the scientists in North Korea and their capabilities are also exaggerated. But looking to the first reason why North Korea won't be able to strike the United States until, quite frankly, a long time from now, is because the diplomatic pressure of economic embargoes and economic sanctions is actually becoming quite effective. Now, an article by Reuters, also from this morning, entitled "European Countries Mark Embargo with North Korea," tells us that the embargo itself is actually including products such as aluminum, which could be used to develop offensive nuclear capabilities. Now, this is further corroborated by an article by the Washington Post that tells us on February 13th of this month that the situation calls for even more economic sanctions by the United States, or specifically China, which has given a transporter to the North Korean people in the past. Now, a book entitled "The Offensive Nuclear Capabilities of North Korea," Dark Cloud with Only One Silver Lining, that was published in late 2012 by the author Richard C. Bush III, tells us that the silver lining in this situation is that the economic sanctions will most likely be helpful in the long run, even though they're failing in the short run. And the reason behind his statement is that if we're consolidating the economic interests of North Korea, eventually the people will revolt, and the People's Liberation Army, or instead North Korea's Freedom Republic, will crumble, and Kim Jong-un will be forced to face the facts. But looking to the second reason why North Korea won't be able to strike the United States for a very, very long time is because China will apply diplomatic pressure. An article by the CBC News Agency from February 10th of this month tells us that Xi Jinping is now holding coalition talks with the incumbent leader of South Korea, Park Geun-hye. Now, given that this meeting only marks one, there's other meetings such as that between Shinzo Abe and the United States President Barack Obama. Now, the nuclear test, which coincided with only 2 hours before President Obama's State of the Union address, actually marks a critical turning point in Chinese relations with regards to North Korea. Now, a separate article by The Economist entitled "Fallout" tells us just as recently as this week that China will most likely not relieve its fuel supplies or food supplies that it's giving to North Korea, but that it will not stand behind any more tech transfers to North Korea that enable them to attack the United States. Now, not to be confused with Psy, the creator of Gangnam Style, Kim Jong-un has risen to power and will most likely stay in power unless he loses the support of the Chinese. Now, given that the administration of North Korea recently called China a puppet of the United States, their relationship may be coming to an end. No more sexy ladies. But looking to the last reason why North Korea won't be able to strike the United States anytime soon is because their scientific credibility is actually quite exaggerated. Now, an article that was released by the College of North Korean Studies, Lou Young specifically is the author and the professor that gave this article. Now, she says that they've exaggerated their own capabilities and that they're trying to convince their people that they live in a land of magical unicorns. But quite frankly, many policymakers, such as Xi Jinping, are not buying that. And this is further corroborated by a separate article by Reuters from 2 days ago, which goes on to say that many of those reforms will distract policymakers such as Kim Jong-un from furthering his nuclear capabilities. And his nuclear capabilities are grossly exaggerated by the media, and South Korea defense industry issued a statement last week saying that it thinks that they have nuclear capabilities, but they do not in fact have uranium, which has been claimed by state media, and that they only have low-level amounts of plutonium, and that they won't be able to attack the United States anyway, because as our new incumbent Secretary of State, John Kerry, would tell us, we have the most advanced weapons technology in the world and can deter that attack in the long run. So in reflecting on today's question, which was, when can we expect North Korea to attack the United States with their nuclear offensive capabilities? We can see the answer is at the soonest, mid-2014, because their capabilities are exaggerated for 3 reasons. First of all, North Korea doesn't have the economic power to do so because of the sanctions. Second, China will apply diplomatic pressure. And lastly, the United States has recognized that their scientific credibility, or the scientific credibility of North Korea, has been called into question. So North Korea as a whole may seem threatening on face, but it's important to remember that the satire used in our own media, The Onion, actually represents a larger trend in which China is no longer understanding the reforms wanted by President Barack Obama, and that if we continue sanctions, it may actually be productive in the long run. Thank you.